David had always been the type of person who couldn't walk past someone in need. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other, his mother taught him that helping others wasn't just the right thing to do, it was what made you human. Now, at 34, he worked as a social worker in Portland, spending his days helping people get back on their feet. Every Tuesday evening, David volunteered at the downtown community center, serving meals to anyone who needed them. The center wasn't fancy, just folding tables, plastic chairs, and a kitchen that had seen better days. But it was warm, and for many people it was the only hot meal they'd get that day. On this particular November evening, the rain was coming down hard, and the center was more crowded than usual. David was behind the serving counter, ladling soup into bowls and chatting with the regular visitors. He knew most of them by name. There was Tom, who used to be a teacher before losing his job, and Mrs. Chen, who had been living in her car since her rent went up. That's when he noticed her. She sat alone at a corner table, hunched over a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. Something about her seemed different from the other visitors. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair that caught the light in an unusual way. Her clothes were strange too. They looked worn and dirty, but the fabric seemed unlike anything David had ever seen. It almost seemed to shimmer when she moved. What really caught his attention were her eyes. Even from across the room, he could see they were an unusual color. Not quite blue, not quite gray, but something in between that seemed to change as she looked around the room. She watched everything with intense curiosity, like she was seeing the world for the first time. David finished serving the dinner line and decided to check on her. As he approached her table, he noticed she was staring at the overhead lights with complete fascination, as if she had never seen electric bulbs before. "Hi there," David said gently, not wanting to startle her. "I'm David. I volunteer here. How are you doing tonight?" She looked up at him with those unusual eyes, and for a moment seemed confused by the question. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried an accent he couldn't place. "I am managing," she said slowly, as if she was choosing each word carefully. "This place, it provides nourishment without payment?" David found her formal way of speaking oddly charming. "That's right, everyone's welcome here. Are you new to the area?" She nodded, then looked around the room again with that same intense curiosity. "Yes, very new. I have been traveling for some time. This is my first visit to such a place." "Well, you're always welcome here," David said. "I'm here every Tuesday, if you need anything. What's your name?" "I am called Zara," she replied, and the way she said it made it sound like music. As David talked with Zara, he noticed other strange things about her. She seemed genuinely puzzled by simple things, like, when someone's phone rang, she jumped and looked around in confusion. When the microwave in the kitchen beeped, she stared at it like it was some kind of miracle. And when someone mentioned the weather forecast, she asked what that meant. "You know, predicting what the weather will be like tomorrow," David explained. Zara's eyes widened. "Humans can predict the future?" David laughed. "Well, not exactly. We just make educated guesses about the weather. We're wrong about half the time." Throughout their conversation, David found himself drawn to Zara's unique perspective on everything. She asked questions that made him think about everyday things in new ways. When she saw people sharing food at one table, she seemed amazed by the concept of strangers helping each other. "This happens often?" she asked. "People giving to others they do not know?" "More often than you might think," David replied. "There are good people everywhere, even when it doesn't always seem that way." As the evening went on, David noticed Zara looking increasingly tired. Her hands shook slightly when she lifted her coffee cup, and she kept blinking slowly, like she was fighting to stay awake. When she tried to stand up, she swayed and had to grab the table for support. "Hey, are you okay?" David asked, moving quickly to her side. I have not rested well in many days," she admitted. "Finding safe places to sleep has been challenging." David's heart went out to her. He had worked with homeless individuals for years, and he recognized the signs of someone who had been struggling for a while. But there was something different about Zara. a vulnerability that seemed deeper than just being without a home. The community center was closing for the night, and David watched as people began to leave, heading back out into the cold, rainy night. He knew that many of them would spend the night in doorways, under bridges, or in shelters that were already overcrowded. As Zara gathered her few belongings, a small, oddly shaped bag that seemed to be made of the same strange material as her clothes, David made a decision that surprised even him. "Zara," he said quietly, "I know we just met, but I have a couch at my apartment. If you need a place to stay tonight, you're welcome to it." She looked at him with those unusual eyes, and for a moment he saw something that looked like relief, mixed with confusion. "You would do this? For someone you have just encountered?" "Sometimes that's when it matters most," David replied. "Everyone deserves a safe place to sleep." Zara was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I would be grateful for such kindness." As they walked to David's car, he noticed Zara stopped and stared at the streetlights, then at the cars passing by. She seemed amazed by everything, even the sound of the rain on the pavement. When David unlocked his car with the remote, she jumped back in surprise. "It responds to that small device?" she asked, pointing at his key fob. "Yeah, it's pretty convenient," David said, though he found her amazement amusing. "Haven't you seen keyless entry before?" Zara shook her head, studying the car like it was some kind of advanced technology. As they drove through the city, she pressed her face to the window, watching the lights and buildings pass by. When the radio came on, she gasped and looked around the car in wonder. The voices, they come from inside this vehicle? David glanced at her with growing curiosity. "It's just the radio. You really haven't seen much technology, have you?" "Not like this," she said softly, and something in her voice made David think there was more to her story than she was letting on. By the time they reached David's apartment building, Zara looked exhausted. As they climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, she had to stop twice to catch her breath. David realized she was probably more malnourished than he had initially thought. His apartment was small but comfortable, a living room with a decent couch, a tiny kitchen, and one bedroom. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry, and right now that seemed like everything to Zara. She stood in the doorway, looking around with the same wonder she had shown at the community center. When David turned on the lights, she watched the bulbs flicker to life with fascination. "Make yourself at home," David said, grabbing some blankets from his closet. "Are you hungry? I could make something quick." Zara nodded gratefully, and David heated up some leftover soup while she sat on the couch, still looking around the apartment like she was trying to memorize every detail. When he brought her the soup, she thanked him with such genuine emotion that it caught him off guard. As Zara ate, David found himself studying her more closely. There was definitely something unusual about her, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Maybe it was the way she seemed so unfamiliar with basic things, or the way she spoke so formally, or those unusual eyes that seemed to see everything with fresh wonder. Whatever her story was, David thought as he set up the couch for her, he was glad he had decided to help. Something told him that this chance encounter was going to be more significant than either of them realized. The next morning, David woke up to the sound of his coffee maker beeping. He had set it the night before like he always did, but as he stumbled toward the kitchen, he found Zara standing in front of the machine, staring at it with complete confusion. "Good morning," David said, rubbing his eyes. "Sleep okay?" Zara turned to him with those unusual eyes wide with concern. "The small box is making noise and producing steam. Is it in distress?" David couldn't help but smile. "It's just making coffee. Haven't you seen a coffee maker before?" She shook her head, watching as the dark liquid dripped into the pot below. "This is how you create the warm drink from yesterday?" "One way, yeah." David poured 2 cups and handed one to her. "There are lots of ways to make coffee." Zara took the cup carefully, like she was handling something precious. She sniffed it first, then took a small sip. Her face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "This is much better than the liquid at the gathering place," she said. David found her way of describing things amusing. "The gathering place? Where you work, where people receive nourishment." Oh, the community center. Yeah, their coffee isn't great. David sat down at his small kitchen table. So what's your story, Zara? Where are you from originally? Something flickered across her face. A look that might have been panic, quickly replaced by that careful, measured expression she seemed to wear most of the time. Very far from here, she said slowly. A place quite different from this one. Over the next few days, David noticed more and more strange things about his houseguest. She seemed genuinely baffled by his television remote, pushing buttons randomly and jumping when the channels changed. When his phone rang, she would freeze and look around like she was trying to locate the source of the sound. And she had an odd habit of touching everything, the walls, the furniture, even the windows, like she was studying their texture. But it wasn't just technology that confused her. Simple human customs seemed foreign to her too. She didn't understand why David locked his door when they left or why he looked both ways before crossing the street. When they went to the grocery store, she was amazed by the concept of paying for food with small pieces of plastic. "These cards hold value?" she asked, watching David swipe his debit card. "Sort of. It's connected to my bank account. The money gets transferred electronically." Zara stared at the card reader like it was performing magic. "Fascinating. Resources are distributed through these small rectangles." David was starting to realize that Zara's unfamiliarity with modern life went far beyond what he had initially thought. At first, he had assumed she had grown up in a very isolated community, maybe somewhere without much technology. But her amazement at basic things like electric lights and running water suggested something more unusual. She also had some habits that David couldn't quite figure out. Every morning, she would wake up before dawn and stand by the window, looking up at the sky with intense concentration. When he asked her about it, she would just say she was checking the patterns and change the subject. And then there were the times when she would stop mid-conversation and tilt her head, like she was listening to something David couldn't hear. When he asked what was wrong, she would just shake her head and say, "Nothing important." The strangest thing happened on the third night. David woke up around 2 in the morning to get some water and noticed that Zara wasn't on the couch. He found her standing in his small backyard, looking up at the stars with her arms raised slightly, moving her hands in slow, deliberate patterns. He watched from the doorway as she made soft sounds, not quite singing, not quite talking, but something musical and rhythmic that he had never heard before. The sounds seemed to have a pattern like a language, but unlike any language he knew. David didn't want to interrupt what seemed like a private moment, so he went back to bed, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The next morning, he decided to ask her about it. "Zara," he said carefully over breakfast, "last night I saw you in the backyard. Were you praying or something?" She looked startled, like she hadn't expected him to notice. "I was communicating." "With who?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. "It is difficult to explain." "Try me," David said gently. "I'm a good listener." Zara looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw real fear in her eyes. "You will think I am unwell. I work with people from all walks of life, Zara. I don't judge." She took a deep breath, then another. "I was trying to contact my family. They are very far away, and I have been unable to reach them for some time. Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you running from something?" "Not running from," she said slowly. "Trying to get back to." David waited, sensing that she was struggling with something big. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "David, what I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to know that I am not like you." "What do you mean?" Zara looked out the window at the morning sky, then back at David. "I am not from here, not from your city, not from your country, not from your world." David felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "Your world?" "I come from a place very far away, beyond the stars you see at night. My people. We were studying your planet and my vehicle had problems. I became separated from the others. They believe I am gone, and I have been trying to signal them ever since. David stared at her, his mind racing. His first instinct was to think she was having some kind of breakdown, but something about the way she said it, the sincere fear in her eyes, made him pause. You're saying you're from another planet? Yes. And you've been stranded, here, for nearly 6 months. David rubbed his forehead, trying to process what she was telling him. Zara, that's impossible. I know how it sounds. But it explains many things, does it not? Why your technology amazes me. Why your customs are foreign. Why I seem to see your world with new eyes. David thought about all the strange behaviors he had noticed, all the questions that had seemed so innocent, but now took on a different meaning. Her fascination with simple machines, her formal way of speaking, those unusual eyes that seemed to shift color in different light. If what you're saying is true, David said slowly, then you've been homeless on an alien planet for 6 months. Zara nodded, and David saw tears forming in those strange, beautiful eyes. I have been so afraid. Your people, if they knew what I was, they would either fear me or want to study me. I have been trying to blend in, to survive until I could find a way home. David felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Whether or not her story was true, the pain in her voice was real. The fear was real. And if she was telling the truth, then she was more lost and alone than anyone he had ever tried to help. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you have been kind to me without asking for anything in return. Because in 6 months of being alone and afraid, you are the first person who has made me feel safe. And because... She paused, looking down at her hands. Because I trust you. David sat in silence for a long moment, looking at this woman who had appeared in his life just a few days ago and turned everything upside down. Part of him wondered if she was having some kind of mental health crisis. But another part of him, the part that had always been drawn to helping people that others overlooked, believed her completely. Okay, he said finally. Okay. I believe you, and I want to help you get home. For the first time since he had met her, Zara smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. And in that moment, David knew that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. After Zara's incredible revelation, David found himself looking at everything differently. The woman sitting across from him at his kitchen table wasn't just someone who needed help. She was literally from another world. And somehow, that made him want to help her even more. Tell me about your home, David said, pouring them both fresh coffee. What's it like where you come from? Zara's eyes lit up, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed to relax completely. It is beautiful, but very different from here. Our cities are built into the sides of mountains with bridges of light connecting them. The sky is a different color, more purple than blue, and we have 3 moons. 3 moons? That must be amazing to see. It is, she said with a wistful smile. But what I think you would find most interesting is how we live together. On my world, no one is ever without shelter or food. When someone needs help, the whole community responds. David was fascinated. How does that work? We share everything, not because we are forced to, but because we understand that helping others helps everyone. If someone becomes ill, others care for them. If someone loses their dwelling, others offer space. It is simply how we live. That sounds incredible, David said. Here, we have people who sleep on the streets even though we have empty buildings. Sometimes I feel like we've forgotten how to take care of each other. Zara shook her head firmly. No, that is not true. You took care of me, a complete stranger. That shows your people have not forgotten. They just need reminding sometimes. Over. The following days, David became Zara's guide to human culture. He took her to the local art museum where she stood in front of paintings for long minutes, amazed that humans could create beauty just for the sake of creating it. On my world, everything we make has a purpose, she explained, studying a landscape, painting. But this exists only to make people feel something. That is remarkable. At the music section of the museum, David played some recordings for her through the headphones. When she heard a violin piece, tears actually came to her eyes. The sounds create emotions, she whispered in wonder. How do your people do this? Music is one of the things that makes us human, David said. Everyone responds to it differently, but almost everyone responds to it somehow. Zara was equally amazed by simple acts of human kindness they witnessed during their walks around the city. When they saw a woman help an elderly man cross the street, Zara stopped and watched with fascination. She gains nothing from this assistance. Zara observed. That's the point, David replied. Sometimes helping others is its own reward. In return, Zara shared more about her world and her people. She explained that they had developed technology that seemed like magic to David. Buildings that could repair themselves, transportation that moved through the air without engines, and communication systems that worked across vast distances. But for all our advancement, Zara said one evening as they sat on David's couch, we have lost something that your people still have. What's that? The ability to love strangers. On my world, we care for each other because it is logical, because it makes society function better. But you, David, you helped me because something in your heart told you to. That kind of compassion, that willingness to risk yourself for someone you don't know, that is rare in the universe. Their conversations were interrupted one afternoon, when David's sister Rebecca showed up unexpectedly at his apartment. David had always been close to Rebecca, but she had a tendency to worry about him, especially when it came to his habit of helping people others might consider risky. I brought lunch, Rebecca announced, letting herself in with her spare key. She stopped short when she saw Zara sitting at the kitchen table. Oh, I didn't know you had company, Rebecca said, though David could hear the suspicion in her voice. Rebecca, this is Zara. Zara, my sister Rebecca. Zara stood and extended her hand formally. It is a pleasure to meet David's family. Rebecca shook her hand, but David could see the questions forming in her mind. After they ate lunch together, Rebecca pulled David aside while Zara was in the bathroom. David, who is she really? Rebecca whispered. And don't tell me she's just someone from the community center. I can tell there's more to this story. She's someone who needed help and I helped her. That's all you need to know. That's not an answer. She talks strange. She acts like she's never seen a microwave before, and there's something about her eyes that's just off. I'm worried about you. Rebecca, trust me. I know what I'm doing. But Rebecca wasn't satisfied. Over the next few days, she started showing up more often, always with excuses, bringing groceries, checking on David's health, wanting to borrow a book. David realized she was watching Zara, looking for clues about who she really was. The situation came to a head one evening when Rebecca arrived unannounced and found Zara standing by the window, making those soft, musical sounds David had heard before. Rebecca watched for several minutes before Zara noticed her. What was that? Rebecca demanded. Zara looked panicked. I was singing a song from my homeland. What homeland? You never told me where you're from. David could see that. Zara was struggling and he made a decision that surprised even him. Rebecca, sit down. There's something you need to know. David, no, Zara said quietly. She's my sister. If anyone can understand, she can. So David told Rebecca everything. About finding Zara at the community center, about her strange behaviors, about her incredible story of being stranded from another world. Rebecca listened in stunned silence, her expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and something that might have been fear. You can't be serious, Rebecca said when David finished. Look at the evidence, David replied. Everything about her that seems strange suddenly makes sense. Rebecca turned to Zara. Prove it. If you're really from another planet, prove it. Zara looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. She walked to the window and placed her palm against the glass. Slowly, the glass began to change color, shifting from clear to a soft blue, then to purple, then back to clear again. Rebecca gasped and stepped backward. How did you do that? My people can influence certain materials at the molecular level, Zara explained. It is a natural ability for us. Rebecca sank into a chair, staring at Zara like she was seeing her for the first time. This is impossible. This changes everything. We have to tell someone. The government, scientists, someone. Who can? No, David said firmly. Absolutely not. David, do you understand what this means? She's proof that we're not alone in the universe. This is the biggest discovery in human history. And what do you think would happen to her if the wrong people found out? David asked. She'd spend the rest of her life in a lab somewhere being studied like a specimen. Is that what you want? Rebecca looked between David and Zara, clearly struggling with the magnitude of what she had learned. Finally, she looked directly at Zara. What do you want? She asked. I want to go home, Zara said simply. I want to return to my people and tell them about the incredible kindness I have found here. I want to make sure they understand that humans are not just intelligent, they are good. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at her brother, and David could see the moment when her protective instincts shifted from suspicion to understanding. Okay, she said finally, but I have one condition. If anyone comes looking, if this becomes dangerous for David, we find another solution. Deal? Zara nodded solemnly. Deal. That night after Rebecca had gone home, David and Zara sat on the couch talking about what had happened. You took a big risk telling her, Zara said. She's family. And you're... David paused, realizing what he was about to say. You're family too now, in a way. Zara smiled, and David saw something in her expression that looked like peace. On my world we have a saying, distance means nothing when someone means everything. I think I understand it now. As they sat together in comfortable silence, David realized that his life had become something he never could have imagined. He was harboring a refugee from another world, someone who had traveled farther than any human ever had, just to end up sleeping on his couch. And somehow, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. 2 weeks had passed since Rebecca learned the truth about Zara, and life had settled into an unusual but comfortable routine. David would go to work during the day while Zara spent time reading books from his small library, fascinated by human stories and history. In the evenings, they would talk for hours about their different worlds, and David found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else in his day. But everything changed on a Thursday morning when David woke up to find Zara sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by pieces of his old electronics. His broken radio was taken apart, along with an old phone charger and the microwave clock that had stopped working months ago. Zara, what are you doing? David asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She looked up at him with excitement he hadn't seen before. I think I can fix it. My communication device. I have been studying your technology, and I believe I can adapt some of these components. David sat down beside her, looking at the mess of wires and circuits. You think you can actually contact your people? I hope so. The principles are similar, just much more primitive. If I can boost the signal strength and adjust the frequency. She trailed off, lost in concentration as she carefully connected 2 wires. David watched her work, amazed by how her fingers seemed to know exactly what to do. She wasn't just putting pieces together, she was transforming them into something entirely new. After about an hour, she sat back with a small device that looked like a combination of all the electronics she had taken apart. Will it work? David asked. There is only one way to find out. Zara held the device carefully and pressed what looked like a smooth section on its surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it began to emit a soft, pulsing light. Zara started speaking in that musical language David had heard her use before, her voice urgent and hopeful. She spoke for several minutes, pausing occasionally as if waiting for a response. Finally, the device made a sound, a series of tones that definitely weren't coming from any Earth technology. Zara's face transformed with joy and relief. Someone was answering. The conversation that followed was unlike anything David had ever witnessed. Even though he couldn't understand the words, he could hear the emotion in the voices, surprise, relief, joy, and what sounded like urgent planning. Zara's eyes filled with tears as she spoke, and David realized she was probably explaining what had happened to her over the past 6 months. When the conversation ended, Zara sat quietly for a moment, still holding the device. "They thought I was dead," she said finally. "When my ship crashed, they searched for me but found no trace. They held a memorial service, my family mourned me. But now they know you're alive. Yes, and they are coming to get me." She looked at David with mixed emotions. "A rescue ship will arrive in 3 days." David felt his heart sink, even though he knew this was what Zara wanted, what she needed. "That's wonderful news," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is it?" Zara asked quietly. "I am happy to return home, but I am sad to leave you. These weeks have been the most meaningful of my life." Over the next 3 days, David and Zara spent every moment together. David took time off work, something he had never done just to spend time with a friend. They visited all of Zara's favorite places in the city, the art museum, the park where they fed ducks, and of course the community center where they had first met. At the community center, David watched as Zara quietly observed everything with new eyes. She studied the people eating their meals, watched volunteers serving food, and paid special attention to the interactions between strangers. "I want to understand this better," she told David. "The way your people help each other, even when they have so little themselves. This is something my people need to learn about." They spent Zara's last full day visiting the homeless shelter where David worked part-time. Zara insisted on helping serve meals, and David watched as she connected with people who were struggling. She listened to their stories with the same intense attention she gave everything else, asking questions about their lives and their hopes. One elderly man named Frank told Zara about losing his job and then his apartment, how he had been too proud to ask his family for help until it was too late. "But people here, they don't judge," Frank said, gesturing around the shelter. "Young David here, he helped me get back in touch with my daughter. Haven't talked to her in 5 years, but last week she came to visit. Sometimes you find family in the strangest places." After they left the shelter, Zara was quiet for a long time. "On my world, Frank's situation would never happen," she said finally. "But neither would what David did. We prevent suffering, but we do not create the bonds that come from choosing to help someone when you don't have to." That evening, Rebecca came over for dinner. The 3 of them sat around David's small table, sharing stories and laughter. Rebecca had brought old photo albums, showing Zara pictures of David as a child. "He was always bringing home strays," Rebecca told Zara with a smile. "Birds with broken wings, lost cats, kids from school who needed a friend. Mom used to say David collected people who needed fixing." "I do not need fixing," Zara said, looking at David with warmth in her unusual eyes. "But I needed finding, and David found me." As the evening grew late, they went out to David's small backyard. Zara looked up at the stars, pointing to a section of sky that looked no different from any other to David. "Tomorrow night they will come from there," she said. "The ship will be invisible to your technology, and they will land somewhere safe. Then I will go home." "Will you tell them about us? About humans, I mean?" Rebecca asked. "I will tell them everything. About David's kindness, about Frank's resilience, about the volunteers at the shelter who give their time for nothing in return. I will tell them that humans are not just intelligent, they are capable of love that asks for nothing back." David felt a lump in his throat. "Will we ever see you again?" Zara reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. "This is made from materials from my world. It will allow me to send you messages, and occasionally, you might be able to send messages to me. Our friendship does not have to end just because I am going home." She handed the stone to David, and he was surprised by how warm it felt in his palm. "Thank you," he said quietly. "No, David. Thank you. For seeing someone who needed help and choosing to help, even when it would have been easier not to. For showing me that kindness is not just about solving problems, it is about caring enough to try." They stood together under the stars, 3 people whose lives had become connected in the most unexpected way. Tomorrow would bring goodbyes and new journeys, But tonight, they were simply friends sharing a moment that none of them would ever forget. As they headed back inside, David looked up at the stars one more time, wondering how many other beings might be out there, and hoping that if any of them ever needed help, they would find someone willing to offer it. The next day would change everything, but for now that was enough. The day of Zara's departure arrived gray and cloudy, matching David's mood perfectly. He had barely slept the night before, knowing that by evening his friend would be gone forever. They spent the morning quietly, neither of them talking much about what was coming. Around noon, Zara asked if they could take one last walk through the city. They visited the coffee shop where David had taken her on her second day, the park where she had marveled at children playing, and finally, the community center where their story had begun. As they stood outside the building where they had first met, Zara turned to David with a serious expression. "There is something I must tell you before I leave," she said. "Something important that you deserve to know." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "What is it?" "Can we sit?" Zara gestured toward a bench across the street. They sat down, and David noticed that Zara's hands were shaking slightly. "David, I told you that my people were studying your planet. That was true, but I did not tell you everything about why." "Okay," David said carefully. "What didn't you tell me?" Zara took a deep breath, looking up at the cloudy sky before meeting his eyes. "My people are facing a crisis on our world. Our resources are running low, and we need to find new places to live. Earth was identified as a possible solution." David felt his stomach drop. "You mean?" "We were not just studying your planet's environment. We were evaluating whether it could become our new home, and if it could, whether the existing inhabitants would need to be relocated." The words hit David like a physical blow. "You were planning to take over Earth?" "Not me personally, but yes, that was the mission. My people believed that humans were a primitive species that could be easily managed or moved to make room for our colonies." David stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away from the bench. He felt betrayed, confused, and angry all at once. "So, everything you've been doing here, learning about us, it was all just research for an invasion?" "No." Zara stood up too, her voice urgent. "David, please listen. When I first arrived, yes, I was gathering information, but everything changed when I met you. How can I believe anything you say now?" Zara's eyes filled with tears. "Because I am about to tell my people that they must never come to this world, not as conquerors, not as colonizers, not as anything other than friends." David stopped pacing and looked at her. "What?" "In 6 months of living among humans, I learned something my people do not understand. You called us advanced because we have better technology, because we have eliminated poverty and homelessness, but we achieve those things through logic and efficiency, not through love." Zara walked closer to David, her voice growing stronger. "What you did for me that first night at the community center, taking a complete stranger into your home, risking your safety for someone you had never seen before, that is something my people have never learned to do. We take care of each other because it makes sense. You take care of strangers because your heart tells you to." "I don't understand," David said, though his anger was beginning to fade. "My people think they are more advanced than humans because they have better machines. But they are wrong. True advancement is not about technology. It is about choosing to help someone when you gain nothing from it. It is about Frank at the shelter, who shares his food with newcomers, even though he has so little. It is about Rebecca, who welcomed me into her family because I matter to you. It is about you, David, who saw someone in need and decided that was enough reason to help." Zara pulled out her communication device. "When I speak to my people tonight, I will tell them that Earth is not suitable for colonization, not because of your technology or your defenses, but because you possess something we do not, the ability to love without reason. And that makes you far more advanced than we are." David felt tears stinging his eyes. "You're going to lie to your own people to protect us?" "I am going to tell them the truth. That humans are not primitive beings to be displaced, but teachers who could show us how to become better than we are. That this world should be protected, not conquered." They stood in silence for a moment, both of them processing the weight of what Zara had revealed. Finally, David spoke. What will happen to your people if they can't come to Earth? We will find another way. Perhaps we will learn to take better care of our own world. Perhaps we will search for uninhabited planets. But we will not take what belongs to others. As evening approached, they returned to David's apartment where Rebecca was waiting with dinner. The three of them ate quietly, each lost in their own thoughts about what was coming. Around 10 o'clock, Zara's communication device began to pulse with light. "It is time," she said simply. They drove to a secluded area outside the city, far from any buildings or streetlights. As they waited in the darkness, David found himself looking up at the stars differently than he ever had before. Somewhere up there were beings who had been planning to take over his world, and now they weren't, all because one of them had learned what it meant to be human. A soft humming sound filled the air, and suddenly a shape appeared against the stars. Sleek and silver, unlike anything David had ever imagined. It landed silently in the field before them, and a section of its surface opened to reveal a doorway filled with gentle blue light. Two figures emerged, tall and graceful like Zara, with the same unusual eyes. They spoke to Zara in their musical language, and David could hear surprise and joy in their voices as they embraced her. Zara turned back to David and Rebecca, tears streaming down her face. "I must go now." She hugged Rebecca first, whispering something in her ear that made Rebecca smile through her own tears. Then she turned to David. "Thank you for showing me what it means to be truly advanced," she said, holding him tightly. "I will never forget what you taught me about kindness." "I'll miss you," David said, his voice breaking. "This is not goodbye forever," Zara reminded him, pressing the glowing stone into his hand once more. "Distance means nothing when someone means everything." She walked toward the ship, pausing at the doorway to look back one last time. She raised her hand in farewell, and David and Rebecca waved back. Then she was gone, and the ship rose silently into the night sky, disappearing among the stars. They drove home in comfortable silence, both of them changed by what they had experienced. Over the following weeks, David returned to his normal routine, but nothing felt quite the same. He approached his work with new energy, remembering Zara's words about human compassion being the most advanced trait in the universe. The glowing stone she had left him pulsed occasionally with messages, brief, but warm communications from a friend who was now impossibly far away, but somehow still close. And sometimes late at night, David would look up at the stars and smile, knowing that somewhere out there, someone was telling others about the importance of kindness, and about a species that had learned to love strangers not because it made sense, but because it was right. The woman he had found homeless and alone had turned out to be his teacher, showing him that the simple act of opening his door to someone in need was, in fact, the most extraordinary thing any being could do. And in a universe full of advanced technologies and distant civilizations, that was a lesson worth sharing with the stars.